Thanks for staying with us here on The Real Story. In the past 2 years, Connecticut voters approved early voting and no-excuse absentee ballots. Now the Government Administration and Elections Committee is considering various bills to expand voter access. Joining me now, ranking member on the GAE Committee, Representative Gale Mastrofranceso, and GAE Committee member, Representative Nick Menapace. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So we've had quite a few voter reform bills over the past 3 sessions, whether it's implementing early voting, discussing security and more. The GAE committee is busy this session, as I feel you are every session. Yeah. I want to start with no excuse absentee ballots. As I said, voters approved this constitutional amendment last election. Now the legislature is tasked with implementing it. However, we saw at the public hearing Secretary of the State Stephanie Thomas actually testifying against a bill to implement no excuse absentee ballots. She had concerns about Connecticut's infrastructure to properly handle this for all residents, saying, it was unlikely that state election workers would be able to build this out for the 2026 election cycle. Representative Mastrofranceso, you've expressed concern about no excuse absentee ballots in the past, sounding the alarm about security. How did it feel hearing that testimony from Secretary Thomas this past week?
It was sounding the alarm.
Yeah.
We need to have more measures in place that protect the integrity of our elections to ensure that the people that are eligible to vote can vote, and no excuse absentee voting, in my view, really just could open the door to more fraud. Now, what does that mean? It just means that people don't really need an excuse anymore to vote.
Right.
They can just request an absentee ballot. The issue we have is the unsolicitation of absentee ballot applications, which is really ripe for fraud. We have a lot of campaigns, political operatives going out, handing them out, going back to collect them, putting them in, getting the ballot, and that's where the fraud really takes place. So that really is my concern, is that I don't have a problem with people voting by absentee ballot as long as they are requesting the application themselves.
And Representative Menapace, is there a way around some of these infrastructure concerns? Do you think this bill can maybe be amended at all, or maybe funding infrastructure for state election officials to be able to implement this correctly?
Yeah. I mean, quite frankly, that's the nail on the head, I suppose.
Right.
There is that the biggest thing here, and that's primarily what the Secretary of State was talking about, is that with the current funding, we already asked essentially towns to roll out early voting without any additional funding from the state. And now we're asking them to roll out no excuse absentee ballots. And this was not some kind of alarm that is necessarily being sent about, the ideas that are being put out there about fraud or something. This is actually being sent out because there is a worry that the infrastructure, you said, is not in place to be able to properly do this in the way that the voters of this state asked us to. And ultimately, I think we're going to need to find a solution for that. I would like to see that come for the state legislature, that we try and put money into that, because this is something that the voters have made very clear that they want to have happen.
We know this is a budget year. Where does that money come from? Can it come this session? Is this something that gets passed off till next session?
I haven't seen anything in the budget or any talks of the state funding it, but the only bill that passed a statute, on our ballot with the constitutional change to allow for no excuse absentee voting. That's all it did. This year, what we did with the bill before us, all it does is really change the language in our statutes to conform with the constitutional change to allow people to vote by absentee ballot. There has not been a concerted effort or discussion about doing, at least this session, about doing mass mailing of absentee ballots. That has not happened. Particularly this session. Now, could it happen down the road? It could be, but again, when that happens, it's obviously, in my opinion, it's ripe for fraud. As long as we have protections in place, signature verification, voter ID, so forth, we have all these in place. I think you need to take those measures first before you do anything else.
Right, it's the conversation about the implementation and how the state goes about this. The other bill getting quite a bit of testimony, ranked choice voting. This measure would establish ranked choice voting for party caucuses, conventions, primaries, including presidential preference primaries. Representative Menapace, this system is already used in 29 states and New York City. What do you see as possible benefits or downsides to having ranked choice voting here in Connecticut?
Yeah. Well, I talked about earlier this week at the session that I'm a social studies teacher by trade, and I'm really excited about this because I have been doing this with every civics class I've had, from middle schoolers up to adult education classes. And this is something that I think a lot of people really are going to like when this is rolled out. And I think it has been very successful where it is. And ultimately what we're doing with here is we're telling towns and political parties that this is something that they can do. And that's what I'm really excited, because I want to see how this is going to be. This is going to be up to the municipalities if this is something they want to roll out. This is going to be something up to political parties if they want to roll out. And I think we heard a lot of really compelling testimony about why this is a good decision. This gives people that ability to have that multiple choices. We have 3 candidates running. Yeah, we can maybe be able to rank those. It's a pretty simple system, but especially when there's that risk of I think we call it the spoiler effect. If you are losing out through using absentee ballots, or say whatever it is, you don't know that the candidate you are supporting has dropped out of the race if it's in a primary, this allows that to go down to the next person. And it ultimately is an easier way so that we can achieve that 50% threshold, or 50 and 1 threshold that we need there. And this is very simple. People know how to do this. Our voters are excited about this, and that's really what our testimony and every single expert I think we had coming in there told us the same thing. Voters want to do this, they want this, and they think it's going to make our system better. And I'm really excited to see what we end up doing with it.
Now, Representative Mastrofranceso, you showed some hesitation about the potential for some voters having more say than others. What are some of your concerns with that?
So as you know now, elections are held by a plurality, right? The one with the most votes win.
Right.
The object to ranked choice voting is to get one of those candidates up to a majority, right, over 50%. And let's just say you have 3 or 4 candidates on the ballot. How it goes is that they are ranked by their first preference, second, and so forth, as we've discussed. And should someone not decide to rank going down to the bottom, maybe they only pick 1 or 2, first and second choice. But when they get to that third position, when they get to that third ballot count, their vote is not, it doesn't count, because they did not choose a third place. Does that make sense? They did not choose a third person. So you're really disenfranchising voters, where they say they're trying to get to a majority, to the 51%, but the majority is not counting all the people that actually voted.
Do you think, if I can just get in there, though, because this is something that I know.
Because they are not being, their ballot is really being not counted because they didn't choose. Not everybody is going to choose the rank in 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I'm just using 4 as an example. They may only choose 1 or 2.
Right.
So they're not involved in the process any longer once they do that.
Okay.
I would just say that is ultimately the voter's decision. If they're choosing that they only want to vote for one candidate, they can do that. We have people who submit blank ballots today, or they submit for one candidate and they don't submit for the rest. That's acceptable. That is their choice. If that's what they want to do, then nothing is stopping them from it. I mean, they submit a blank ballot. We're not saying that they're being disenfranchised because they didn't choose to have anyone. And I think ultimately, again, this is about more choice for voters, and I think that's a good thing.
So, Rep. Menapace, I want to start with you for this. Both of these conversations, we've heard in the past couple sessions, starting with the implementation of early voting, from the Secretary of the State's office saying they don't have funding to do voter outreach or public education. I know Senator Tony Wong testified in favor of ranked choice and said there needs to be money to back that up to do proper voter education. Do you think there needs to be some allocation from the legislature to allow the Secretary of the State's office, whether it's no excuse absentee ballot implementation or maybe eventually ranked choice, to let voters know what's going on and what these changes are?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think that we do need to engage people civically. I think that as a civics teacher, this is something that's really important. I think we can all agree that being civically engaged is important. It's part of our duty as a citizen. It's something I know I've taught for years. And I want us to see that doing it. I don't know if it's necessarily something we need to do, but I think it's something as a legislator that we should be doing.
Yeah.
We need to, or we should be educating people on what their rights are as a voter. We should be educating them about this system that might work better for them. And I think ultimately, most of the places that have done this ranked choice, they've found that it's been very successful. When we've done no excuse absentee ballot, there has not been this problem of massive voter fraud. We're finding success with these programs, and it's getting more people to vote, and that's ultimately what we want.
I would disagree. Obviously, we've had a lot of issues in the state of Connecticut, particularly Bridgeport, when it comes to absentee ballots. When you go to vote in person, you know who's voting, right? There's very little fraud that we see there, but it all begins with an absentee ballot because you never really know who is voting. And we've even heard this from the president of pro tem of the Senate, Martin Looney, saying that you really don't know who's voting when they vote by absentee ballot. So I would respectfully disagree with my colleague here. It does happen. It is happening in Connecticut, and it's certainly happening across the country. So there's no reason why we can't have measures in place just to protect the integrity of our elections.
We've seen conversations around security at the legislature after the incident in Bridgeport. Specifically, I'm thinking about security cameras at ballot drop boxes, possibly limiting the number of absentee ballot applications that certain parties are allowed to have. Do you think these are successful security measures?
Well, I think the unsolicitation of absentee ballot applications really is where the problem is. Listen, yesterday in our committee, we offered 5 amendments to protect the integrity of our elections. We offered an amendment for voter ID, signature verification, the unsolicitation of absentee ballots, and so forth. Every single Democrat voted against our amendments. So it's clear that their priorities are not to protect the integrity of our elections. They feel that it's fine the way it is. It's common sense. Every single Democrat voted against our amendments.
We've heard from the Secretary of the State really trying to assure people, especially in the past election season last year, that Connecticut's elections, are secure and safe. What's your response to that?
I mean, it's a very simple one. We did have an attempt at voter fraud in Bridgeport, and it will be honest, it was something that was immediately discovered. I think that really says to us that that our securities are working. And we, in a unanimous decision, I shouldn't say I was not part of the legislature, but the legislature passed additional security measures to address these. And I think to be honest, I think it's just playing politics to claim that there's this massive issue of voter fraud, because there hasn't been any evidence that that's happening. We've had limited cases. That's going to happen for this one. Almost every single one that we've had, it's been immediately discovered. I've seen a lot more cases of people claiming voter fraud with no evidence for it. And ultimately, with the reference that the representative made to the other day, I had said the same thing in this. I think that some of these suggestions are ones that maybe the committee could have taken up. I did not think it was appropriate to add them onto this bill, because they did not go through the proper steps of having a public hearing, have these be submitted to them, because they would radically change what that bill ultimately did. And that's what we said in the meeting, and it's why I know I voted against each one of these amendments.
Well, and I would say that the reason why these do not have a public hearing is because your party will not allow us to have a public hearing on them. We submit these bills as regular bills every single year, and they never advance through the process to have a public hearing. So those are the facts. We propose these amendments all the time, so there's really no reason for it. And when we talk about voter fraud, you can just do a search on Google, and you can see plenty of cases where there was questions about absentee ballots and voter fraud in Connecticut to see them. So if my opposition party, the Democrats, insists that there is no voter fraud in Connecticut, they would have absolutely no problem taking extra measures to make sure that it doesn't. Obviously, the case in Bridgeport is a big problem. We've actually sent in a letter to the Attorney General to have her check into it. The measures that my colleague here is saying that they've taken to address that does not address the problem. It doesn't get to the root of the problem, right? It's really just a Band-Aid. Putting cameras on the ballot boxes, it's not going to prevent someone from doing that, right? It's always after the fact. No. These measures that we suggested obviously would deter any potential fraud that there is.
Right, and I do want to give you really quickly, because we're almost out of time, if you want to respond, just
I'll say
15, 30 seconds.
This is the same part of it. It is a political. We're going to have differences of opinion on this, but ultimately, I want people to be able to vote. And I don't think the attempt by the other party on this one to suppress votes is a solution. I think that is attempting to get rid of people that they don't want to vote because they ultimately think that they're more likely to win that way. I want everyone to vote, and we actually had one on that of trying to strive for more voter participation. We want to have everyone ultimately be able to do that. Now, that is, the obligations of a citizenship to be in there, but this is something that, again, I'm about data. We have nothing that suggests that this is a widespread issue. every one of our people who is in charge of determining this has produced that, yes, this is not a massive issue. There is no evidence of it. And ultimately, I think people saying it, it's just because they think that that's something that they can run on, that they think that that's something that will be successful to them to try and cast doubt on our elections. And I think that that's really I shouldn't say unprofessional, because I would never call us that. I think it's really a disservice, though, because I really appreciate what our election workers do.
Well, I know this is a huge conversation, and I know we don't have any time left, but thank you both so much. We'll, of course, be following this throughout the session. As I said, GAE is always very busy, and very busy again this year with election laws, so we'll be following these proposals throughout the rest of the session. Thank you both so much for taking a couple minutes to check in with me.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
That does it for us here now on The Real Story. But if you want to watch these segments again, you can head to fox61.com or download the free Fox 61 News app and watch The Real Story every Sunday at 10 a.m. right here on Fox 61. Have a great rest of your morning.